morning, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Good morning.
Introducing my panelists here to speak on the unstoppable rise of AI, regulation, innovation, and litigation. To my left, I have Jane Horvath from the law firm Gibson Dunn. I have in the middle Baghdad Giras, the Chief Data Officer of Medad Holding, a diversified conglomerate based in the UAE. And at the end, I have Kafir Goodrich, the Managing Director and CIO of BlackRock, who focuses on innovation. So thank you for joining me. I'm excited to share everyone's insights. I think we have a diverse group here, which is on theme with Abu Dhabi Financial Week. To start, I want to lay the groundwork and make sure that folks have a grounding on this idea that the UAE has stated that it intends to be a global leader in the development of artificial intelligence. I'm sure many are aware of not only the investments that the UAE and its relevant asset managers have made investments in leading frontier model developers, but also the work that local companies are doing here, which has included TII and G42 and their work in pushing the edge and bleeding edge foundations in technology that are being recognized globally. I want to start by talking about, though, how AI, we've read all these promises and claims, how it's already affecting the industry. I think folks here are aware of software development. People have been using codexes, which are tools that automate software and software development, as well customer service response agents. People have read about AI agents and bots. I'm going to start with you, Baghdad. Can you speak a little bit about this idea about empowering workforce and how AI enables companies and individuals to meet their ambitions, and in particular within the region, the ambitions for workforce empowerment without necessarily leading to a displacement? What are your thoughts on how you balance those two?
So obviously there is a will from the leadership to empower.
I don't think they can hear you. You want to try again?
Hey. Oh, I think that's fine. Sorry. So basically, we are talking about probably digital workforce. Okay, so the idea is mostly to empower employees to have a co-pilot, right? I think that's what everyone is using right now, is an assistant that have the aim to just take over those repetitive tasks and fastidious tasks that no one is really interested to do. By doing this, basically, most of the employees are able to focus on more, I would say, added value tasks and focus on more reasoning capabilities than just repetitive tasks. On the other hand, and that's mostly maybe for the tertiary sector, from a manufacturing standpoint and more industrial side, there is the idea of embodied AI, and that's more about how can we have within the UAE, for example, something that we can call autonomous manufacturing units. So those are mostly highly robotic, intensive manufacturing units that operate mostly with robots. Obviously, that will bring, or I'll say reduce, some of the dependency that the UAE might have with blue collar. But obviously, that will create also jobs on the engineering side for the local population that will be more involved on added value tasks.
Thank you. There was an MIT economist named David Autor, which pointed out that 60% of today's jobs didn't exist just 80 years ago. So there's this rapid cycling and development, as you point out, Baghdad, about new opportunities. But I want to focus a little bit more on displacement and in particular regions and outsourcing. So if you look at countries like Bangladesh and others in Southeast Asia, which have large outsourcing practices focused on call centers, and the idea that as you automate or create these quick heuristics, whether it's robotic process automation or intelligent agents, that these manual tasks could disappear, and what happens to that impact and that labor. Kafir, I think you have some experience on this as well, the idea of automating tasks within your organization. Can you share with us some of your concerns and how you balance this idea of empowering the right people without necessarily disenfranchising or displacing the human capital?
Well, I think for the last maybe 5 to 7 years, you see these doomed articles all over the world. They are saying, 100,000 people are going to lose their job in asset management, and all kind of statements like this. And these are statements that some people have some opinions, but they are very irrelevant, because we live in a times that things are changing so fast that an article like this become irrelevant, with the speed of light. I'll give you some examples. Baghdad mentioned, co-pilots, right? So beginning of the year, starting actually almost last year, there was data published for people developing on GitHub and saying, 40% of developers' efficiency, productivity is getting through the co-pilot there. Couple of weeks ago, I've been on a stage with one of the executives of GitHub, and they mentioned already 55% productivity. So from the beginning of the year already, that changed. It was not even published, that 55% improvement with Copilot. That's awesome. What does it mean? It means that somebody is doing some things on GitHub and is more productive. What does it mean for the company he's working for? Well, the number there, if you're going to look into it, it's maybe 10%. How can it be such discrepancy between the numbers? Well, because developers in financial institution or any kind of place that they need to learn something from somebody in order to code, they need to have some meetings. So about 50% of their time is spent in these meetings. Okay. Then, if yesterday I was doing development, and Baghdad knows me and has some experience with my work, when I'm coming for him to QC, to quality look into my work, he will say, he's trusting me pretty much, and he will go very fast on the code, and he will give me approve to go into production. Now, I'm telling him that I did that with Copilot and AI. He is going to spend the whole weekend to look at every line of code and every explainability around it. So here is how time for an institution is changing versus the number published. So productivity suddenly is different. So yes, you can have improvement in development of the code. You can have improvement in documentation and quality of documentation with this kind of tasks. And then you mentioned these things you mentioned in one bunch, this AI and process automation. And these are two different things. But they are somehow connected. And this is something that hyperscaler even understood that in the last year or so, and they are doing efforts of that. Why? Because we're doing copilots, we're doing agents right now, like you saw the beautiful song that was put together by Rachel, which is, everybody can do that. You go to any app and you can do something like that. It's awesome. But can you cook with that in work to create productivity? Well, not so much. You need to take one agent that knows to do just that with another agent that knows to do something else and start interconnecting them. How can you interconnect them? Through some kind of process automation. So that's in some places and some publications, people mention that almost like the you know, like the difference between atoms and molecules. You know, you have sodium, it's awesome. You have something poisonous like chlorine, but you put them together, you create salt that is required in any kitchen in the world. So why this is important? Because you need something to interconnect these agents in order to create workflow, in order to create value, in order to get to productivity. So we're right now in this run that we're going between co-pilots with agents. The next thing is going to be, we believe, 2025, the story of co-workers, which they are going to be more integrated things, to your point, you know, Amir, on how to get value out of it. So this is where we are right now in the journey, if it makes sense.
That's very helpful, and I think you pointed out that sometimes mentioning AI leads to more human review. I was speaking to a friend who leads an AI company actually based in the region, and they've actually, their salespeople have dropped mentioning that AI is in their solution because they found that the minute they mention AI is there, people worry about hallucinations and start to want to check the homework too much, even though they're using machine learning.
Yeah, but as a friend, you immediately told him, no, you need to have this disclaimer developed with AI, otherwise you're going to have a legal issue.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good segue into the regulation and legal issues. So, Jane, I'd like to start with you, and I'm hoping you can share some insights into how different jurisdictions are approaching AI regulations. Are you seeing global themes, or are there significant differences based on each country's perspectives and ambitions?
Sure, and I want to thank the organizers for having me here today. We're in a very, very interesting spot with respect to AI regulation right now. I have spent my career as a privacy lawyer. I spent 11 years as Apple's chief privacy officer. So I've been in the trenches on privacy regulation. AI is also not new. AI has been around for a long time. I had a team dedicated to working in AI at Apple long before the headlines in November of 2022. So the interesting thing that we're seeing right now, and for many of you in the room may be familiar with the Brussels effect. The Brussels effect was very, very evident with GDPR. GDPR was promulgated throughout the world. You know, some might argue that the basis of GDPR was the Fair Information Practice Principles, so it was easy to make laws across the world. With AI, we're seeing a real hesitation on regulation right now. So the EU, prior to November 2022, had been drafting an AI regulation. And then once the announcement of ChatGPT put AI on the front page, they really sped up and they wanted to get this law out, anticipating that they would have the Brussels effect, that they would be the first. And in fact, when the EU AI Act was passed, one of the EU commissioners texted, the EU is the first in regulation, waiting to see what would come. But what we've really seen is a hesitation worldwide on passing laws. The EU AI Act, which we'll probably discuss a little bit more later, is a risk-based approach, but it is a law. It contains significant penalties. And what we're seeing throughout the world right now is really a hesitation in principles. Singapore has put out best practice principles, recommendations, et cetera. The US has an executive order, but we understand that the president, the newly elected president, President Trump, will most likely be canceling that executive order on AI. So we're really in a moment here right now from a regulatory standpoint with one footnote. There are existing laws out there that can be used to enforce against the most egregious risk of AI. And so I think that is the one caution I want to have is people think, oh, AI is not regulated, I can do anything. Well, that's actually not in fact true. There are so many different laws out there, including copyright, which you already discussed, that will come into play as we're looking at the promulgation of AI.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, you highlighted it, but for the benefit of the audience, President Biden in October of 2023 passed the executive order, which was meant to be a start, really, in the U.S. It amounted to what I'd call maybe very light regulation on some of the frontier model developers to show what went into or to verify some aspects of training, but then it was largely a homework exercise for the federal government.
So not to give you all a civics lesson in U.S. law, but an executive order only has the authority to control the federal government. And so much of what the executive order did was controlled anybody who sold to the federal government. You know, these were requirements for entities that worked with the federal government. And then it tasked different parts of the government to conduct studies.
And then as you point out, though, as some of you all may have heard, there was recently an election in the U.S., and we anticipate a number of changes, one of which the incoming administration has been very expressive about, which was undoing what they thought was a poorly drafted. I will note, it is the largest in terms of volume executive order ever promulgated in the U.S., 111 pages, well over 100 pages. And the Trump administration has essentially said that they're going to be undoing large parts of that. The reason I want to focus on that a little bit is, as you mentioned, the Brussels effect, how one regulation can have broader effects. I think it would be a misreading to say that all regulation of AI in the United States, where a lot of the large language models are trained, is going to disappear. I think you and I probably will agree on this idea that California will come back to the fold. So maybe, you know, being formerly from Apple, can you speak a little bit about what California almost didn't do, and now what they might do?
Absolutely. So we have a federal system, which is the overarching federal government. We also have the states. And we fully anticipate that we have blue states, red states, Democrat, Republican-controlled states. We very, very much anticipate that California and a lot of the Democrat-controlled states will fill the vacuum left by the federal government. They've already done that in privacy. So California has already passed a Privacy Act. They have, within that privacy law, which is common in most privacy laws, rules on automated decision making. And you know, if a process is purely made by an automated decision making, human beings have certain rights. And so California has just published proposed regulations on automated decision making under that act. I would encourage everybody to read it and comment if it impacts you, because it is very broad. The definition of automated decision making, incredibly broad, and I would argue actually covers a lot of things that are not actually automated decision making. The other thing California did is they proposed an AI Safety Act, and many providers and AI developers said that would have essentially killed open source AI. It required a kill switch on all AI being developed. It also required downstream liability if your AI is distributed, which if you're an open source provider in the truest sense of open source, it's very difficult if you're liable for the downstream distribution. So I do think very similar to privacy in the United States, which right now is 27 states or 20-something states have their own privacy laws that are all not consistent. We're going to see that in the states. Colorado has passed an AI Act. I think that's where the vacuum will be filled in the states.
So yes to everything you said. I also want to point out, interestingly though, that State Bill 1047, which you referred to, with the kill switch, has one very notable proponent, which is Elon Musk. And I think that raises the question of when they're signaling that you're going to tear up the executive order and there's going to be less regulation, we have President Trump's what we'll call maybe chief technological advisor and a lot of other things, who was a noted proponent of State Bill 1047. So to be written around regulation. I want to take it back, though, on the idea of regulation to what exactly is it that we're regulating? This idea of artificial intelligence, which really started as a philosophy of creating machines that emulate the way we thought humans think. You know, we have regulators all over the world who are not necessarily very proficient in technology, who are trying to regulate something that even basic researchers, right now this week, there's a huge conference called NeurIPS going on. I bet you if you wanted a precise definition of artificial intelligence and asked 10 researchers there, you'd get 10 different answers. So with that, I'd like to ask our co-panelists, Kafir and Baghdad, you know, what exactly are the regulators regulating? Do you think they really understand what it is they're regulating? And in particular, I want to highlight, Kafir, you pointed out when I mentioned RPA and automation, the distinction between what we call deterministic and non-deterministic, and this idea, as Jane pointed out, machine learning has existed for a while. What's so different technologically between, you know, generative AI, this new type of artificial intelligence, and in your views, both of your views, Baghdad and Kafir, do you think that should be regulated, whether generative, this newer strain, should be regulated with the same light and view as the classic machine learning, or is that going to cause more confusion?
So indeed, AI, it's about 68 years old.
Yes.
So, but November 22 was something that changed a lot of stuff. So the story of deterministic and non-deterministic and why this is important. So it is crazy that in a legal forum I need to talk about, you know, the theory of systems, but this is core to lawmakers. It's almost, I think, like the idea for those of you who read all kind of fiction about Deus ex machina, the God into the machine. So that's kind of exactly what it is. You have a box, and the box is predictive. You put something at the entrance of the box, and you get something at the other side of the box. And you know exactly every time what you're putting inside, what you're going to get out of it. That's awesome. How about when you're going to put something in that box, and every time you're going to get something else? It's kind of going to be a problem for the people that they are overseeing this whole process happening. So lawmakers, they cannot live so well with this kind of environments when you're suddenly putting a box, you know, and have every time different results. And, you know, to give examples like this, you know, you guys are familiar, you know, pricing is something that is kind of deterministic. You go and you create a price, and you understand how the price is getting done. It's formulaic. We have, you know, models. We have model committees in financial systems. Every kind of model you need to put, because in our case, we're, you know, fiduciary. We need to explain everything. Explainability is very important.
You have regulators. Everyone is looking. The bank regulators are looking at all of your algorithms.
Absolutely.
You have to show your homework.
Everything, super. So therefore, you have model committee, and it's a via dolorosa. You go through the model committee. It doesn't matter what kind of brilliant scientist you are. You're going to be asked all the questions, and it's going to be very thorough. Now, you know, markets are a little bit more problematic. It's almost like markets are, you know, the technological twin. I'm not saying digital, technological twin of network channels, where you have all kind of things happening there, and therefore you have this definition of signals to noise ratio, SNRs, right? So kind of understanding what is real and what is not so much. Now, I think the best understanding of what's the danger with this kind of a non-deterministic thing, it came in the middle of the year in the magazine Nature. I'm not sure if you guys seen that. This idea that with this AI, we're going to generate a lot of data that is kind of machine data. It's kind of machine-generated data, and you start using these things, and when scientists starting doing that more and more with this synthetic data, something happened to the models. And the models, suddenly they don't work so well, they behave weird. So there is this notion called model collapse. I think that's the most interesting thing for lawyers and for people that they try to do regulation, to look into it. Look, I had the opportunity to have a chat with, people that they work, in the area of, regulating things or taking care of things to be right into AI companies. And suddenly they got fired. They say, we don't need you guys anymore. The machine knows to do it better than you do. And these people told me, that's true. The machine, they are doing a way better job than what we do for now. Later, we'll see, because things are changing. So what these people are doing right now, believe it or not, they are advising to the EU committee, to all kind of law things, in order to understand what to regulate. So I just had last week a discussion with a panel of lawyers that they were looking into what's coming out towards us, and you're seeing, all kind of people in the area of credit, for example, that they use, customers' data without the approval of the customers, plugging that into the AI models, and that's kind of not exactly the right thing to do. So what they are doing, they are putting a human in the middle in order to deal with that, and basically, I did not let the machine use that data, I actually had somebody in the middle. So this whole idea that once we call immersive computing, it's suddenly becoming a requirement in order to deal with the law. So that's kind of I think, some cool angles of the complexity that you guys were talking about.
Well, there's a further level of complexity and this intersection of laws that are purporting to regulate a technology. And so, Jane, I want to focus on your expertise in privacy and understanding privacy's role in all of this. Kifir mentioned that this idea of technologies. There's the GDPR notion of the right to be forgotten, which assumes that when people collect your information, you as a data subject can simply request of them to delete your data. That's a very sensible request and idea. The challenge is when you're building large language models, these huge AI models, they are not simply databases. You can't simply go to a cell and delete a data row or element and have that reflected in the output. And I think the regulators...
There are some lawsuits already that people, basically companies forgot to delete, or that storage volumes, they were kind of lost. And
well,
that's kind of,
right? I think this is the technology. Yeah. It's disaggregated. You can delete the training data, and it has no effect on the way the model is able to work. So, Jane, how are the regulators thinking about this? What's going on? How do you comply with the law in a world in which the technology has moved beyond?
Well, this is the number one question right now. I mean, more fundamentally, there is a very large conflict with GDPR and training data. So we know that AI, as we've talked about, needs huge amounts of data to be trained. And the best way to do that is to go out and scrape the entire web to train your model. Well, right now, the group of regulators, the European Data Protection Board, which is made up of all the European regulators, are considering what legal basis is required for taking that personal data, scraping it off the web, because obviously, when you scrape the web, you're going to pick up some personal information. So what legal basis did these model providers and developers have to process that data to train their models? Because under GDPR, you have to have a legal basis. One of the legal bases is consent. The other, which we would argue would be the better basis, would be legitimate interest, where you do a balancing test based on the potential risks to the individual and the benefit to the company. You balance it, and your balance always needs to be that the risk to the individual is lower. The EDPB right now is considering whether consent is going to be required for processing this personal data to train a model. Should they come out, and the opinion comes out on the 23rd of December, which is an interesting date, right before the holidays. Should they determine its consent, one would argue it will be next to impossible to train a model in Europe. So then that takes us, once you've crossed the Rubicon to having a legal basis to process data, you have to then comply with GDPR. One of the requirements are these user rights. The right of the user to edit their data, delete their data, see the data that you hold against them or about them. And OpenAI, this is very public, has been under investigation by the Garante, which is the regulator in Italy. And this was one of the initial claims, that they violated user rights when they were training. And early users, and even now, if you query ChatGPT about yourself, you may find, and it produces something different every time because it's basically looking at logic, you may find that it produces erroneous data about you. I did ask it to write my bio, and it was a very well-written piece of fiction. So I say, okay, I have user rights to fix this. It's wrong. But because they've trained the model is only looking to see what is logical in its output. There's really no way to correct your data. So what OpenAI has done is basically told the model not to produce data about a potential individual. But if you go down this rat hole, how do I tell OpenAI that I'm the Jane Horvath that doesn't want data produced about me? I mean, my name is rare, but it's not unique. I'd have to start providing huge amounts of data. I'm the Jane Horvath that lives in, blah, 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 in order to actually figure out to tell the output of ChatGPT not to produce output about me. So we are in absolutely a very difficult situation legally. GDPR comes with very large fines, 4% of global annual turnover. And I would say that, a lot of jurisdictions have copied GDPR. So this is not just going to be a GDPR problem, but it's going to be one that's going to need to be worked out from a regulatory standpoint.
So we have personal data as one of the issues in AI model training. Baghdad, I want to ask you, I know you're familiar with how non-English language models have been trained. Can you set the table and explain maybe some other issues that come to play with training, whether it's Arabic language model or just model training in general outside of personal data?
Well, I'm not sure if there are some specific challenges based on the languages, but it's more tied on the, can you hear me? Yeah. So it's more tied on the volume of data that you can have access. Obviously, English corpus are way more, I will say, available. But at the end of the day, training a model, if you want, is like a little bit like doing product development, okay? It starts with the problem statements, clearly identify, breaking down into, I will say, sub-problem in which you're going to start to look at what data do I need to collect, where is the data, how can I enhance the quality of the data. And obviously, when you are in an English corpus, those data sets sometimes already exist. In other languages, not necessary, so you do a lot of work related to data set collection and data preparation. And that obviously impacts the accuracy of the model, and that's why we are more into what we call now a data-centric approach to AI. That's why somehow the European Union is trying to push into this direction of having highly curated data set, because they can prove that you can use way less data and still have very good model, rather than going everywhere and take a lot of data. And just one anecdote on that. Maybe you guys are familiar with the interview of Mira Murati, the former CTO of OpenAI, with the Wall Street Journal. She's being asked, like, you know, Sora is doing great. What kind of data did you use? And she was, you know, public available data. Like, what does that mean, public available data, right? And then she was very, very confused, and people, you know, make this meme: do not ask a man his salary, a woman her age, and an AI engineer what kind of data they use. Like, it's like a dirty little secret that, you know, and it's so sensitive.
Yes. You know, as someone who was there in the spring of 2022 and was helping curate and train these foundation models, I would say there was an understanding amongst the AI research community that if it was available, and there were sets, you know, whether it was Lion 5B or other data sets that were being available for training, the researchers, which were really mathematicians, found these data sets and said, we're just going to start training. I think lawyers and others got involved a little bit, you know, later in the process. But I think you're right. It was this idea that we can train. And I think those of you all that were here for my introductory remarks, there is a concept in many copyright regimes about using facts and ideas and basic data, but there is a tension with copyright law. Kfir, I want to ask you, because there's really only, I don't know, I'm just going to call it 10 companies that are fundamentally training very large language models. So this idea of like scraping the whole internet, while intellectually interesting to us, really only applies to a small number of companies. 99.99% of companies and entities are going to be using these models to make their own organization smarter in this process called fine-tuning, taking your own data and making your own version of a model smarter. Can you talk a little bit both about this idea of fine-tuning, but also how to think about the data that you can and should be using? You mentioned, you know, a cognizance of that. So,
yeah, I think you know, that made a very good point. You know, it's about the effectiveness of the whole process. That's what matters at the end of the day. And large language models, they are not necessarily the best thing that you need. It's very cool for writing a song like this, but at the end of the day, you know, for example, we used in a certain application, you know, open large language models, and they were awesome, and they were bringing us to about 50% effectiveness for the process that we wanted to use. I cannot do any kind of, there is no value for me, 50% effectiveness.
yeah, if Jane and I, by the way, answer our clients and say with a disclaimer, I'm only going to be 50% right, we'd be 100% fired.
Exactly. So then, you know, you start using closed language models, and suddenly, you're jumping, you know, 30, 40% in your effectiveness, or it's bringing you into the range of possible. But then, you know, you mix data that it's a little bit more private data, a little bit more things that they are irrelevant for you, and things start, you know, it's you're in the right directions there. But I think for a lot of applications, in particular for things that, you know, a million years ago, which in reality was just 5 years ago, people were talking about edge computing. For these kind of applications, they are a little bit more remote, a little bit more segregated. Medium, you know, language models, you know, might be better, or even small, you know, small language models might be better suited. Companies like Mistral understood these things, and others, and basically utilizing data sets that they are a little bit more relevant to you can bring you more value for what.
And there is obviously the cost of the compute.
Oh, but of course, in the moment, you know, we are currently very focused on developing on large language models. You know, Jensen Huang mentioned, we need to have AI a million times faster, better than what we have right now. In order to get there, let's bring this to reality. We need to get to a GPT-4, pretty much, to a GPT-7, to get closer to an AGI, direction. So therefore, everybody is talking about, training models, big models. Let's train. Very few people talking about inference, and that's what it means. That this is why currently we are very little into actual production and generating real, money with AI.
Exactly.
I think my hypothesis is because no one has explained the technology. So I want to go back to this theme. I mean, Kefir raises a really good point. People got excited about the capabilities. We saw essentially public demonstrations of ChatGPT back in 2023, and no one explained the architecture of AI models. In today's cloud computing and general SaaS world, you expend an enormous amount of time building these systems, but relatively speaking, once you've built them, deployment is rather low cost in terms of energy and other things. AI doesn't work that way at all. You get no discount in the deployment. In some ways, inference is more expensive. So as much as we've talked about the entire corpus of the web being scraped and how much energy that takes to train a model, I mean, these systems will run for weeks, months at a time with 10, 20, 30, now Elon has 100,000 GPUs hooked together, right? These systems are running constantly in order to train a model. I think what Kefir is pointing to is there is no discount for inference, which means every time I ask ChatGPT a question, or any of you all ask it to, Sora is a great example. Today, I think they released Sora today, the video model from ChatGPT. Yeah. It is enormously expensive in terms of compute cost to generate a video. I can ask it to create a video of a mastodon roaming the plains in Africa, and it will do that for me, but enormously expensive in terms of inference costs. So that's one of the things where I think once we get to a global glossary and everyone understands the terms, we can address these challenges better.
And
yeah.
I think it's also because the way we've been discussing about AI is mostly tied to compute. So
Yes.
every time it's like, we have the biggest GPU farm, so we are the most efficient. And in the other side, I would say, of the world, in China, for example, they are building AI models that are more frugal because they don't have access.
Well, they've been subject to export control laws.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that brings us to the conversation on the export control, because when regulators try to regulate AI, the first pieces that seems to be obvious to regulate is the hardware, right? You know where it is, you can track it, there is a clear supply chain, a limited number of suppliers, and I would say an extreme concentration of suppliers. And therefore, going into the different layer, which is like compute, data, and model, the obvious one is compute. And that's the reason why I will say companies like OpenAI, with the deal that they have with Microsoft and others, okay, let's secure the biggest amount of GPUs, because that's going to guarantee my lead in AI. And turns out, the efficiency of those models very recently started to plateau. So when we enter to reasoning capabilities, it's not about having the biggest amount of data and the biggest amount of compute. Now we are getting a little bit more into reasoning capabilities because it makes sense. How can we build intelligence out of strength, right? Intelligence should come in a very, I would say, refined and crafted, innovative way of building those algorithms.
And on that note of the machines needing to better network and better conference that we raise here at a global conference of ourselves, I'd like to thank the panel for joining me in this exciting discussion. We're available for questions afterwards should anyone have any. Thank you, everyone.